To People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to talk about professional development, building a business, building wealth, all of the things attendant to those subjects. And today I'm going to talk about writing a book. So, in my experience, there are a lot of people who want to write a book. And having written a book myself, I can tell you it is very fulfilling. It was a lot of work. Very glad I did it. And through a program that I got from a fellow by the name of Michael Hyatt, this program showed me how to get an agent, and I did get an agent. Actually, I got offers from two agents, if you can imagine. And unfortunately, the one I chose was not able to get me a publishing deal. That was a disappointment. But in any event, I think a lot of us want to write a book. But what I found was, I think I've wanted to write a book since I was a child. It was always kind of a dream I had in the back of my mind, but I never really did it. And I talked to a lot of people who want to write books and somehow they never quite get around to it. So I think the reason, at least part of the reason, is because they're not sure about why and what and how, those kind of basic questions. The idea of writing a book sounds very appealing, but sitting there and putting pen to paper isn't necessarily something that they're prepared to do unless there's a very strong push behind that. So I'm going to talk about why you may want to write a book, and if you decide your why, that's a big part of it, then what you should write about. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to write a book in perhaps the lowest brain damage way. We'll put it to you that way. So I'm going to go through 8 different reasons why you may want to write a book, beyond just I want to write a book so I can have written a book. I mean, that was really my raison d'être, as you've heard me use, reason for being, for most of my life, is I wanted to write a book so I could say to myself, okay, you wrote a book. Now my my goal is to become a published author, not a self-published author. Although there's nothing wrong with self-publishing, what I'm looking for, candidly, is someone else who says, yeah, this book is of the quality that we want to spend our money on it and take a risk publishing it. So that's, and the reason I haven't done that is that's somewhat of, not somewhat, it's a vanity project, and it's just not something I'm going to spend time doing right now. But in terms of more sort of practical reasons for writing a book, that's what I'm going to talk about first. And I think the first one is to establish your credibility or your authority as an expert in your particular field. So when you say, for example, I'm an expert plumber, right? Okay, it's all good and well to say that. If you say, I've written a book on plumbing that was published, and it explains how you can, the kind of sort of do it at home plumbing things that you, a homeowner, can do. So that's at a different level, because now you're essentially, it's not unlike being a teacher, where you're putting yourself in the position of being able to train or explain to others something that they don't know, right? And so in doing so, you set yourself apart from, kind of the rest of the pack. So uh, this was, I'm gonna check and tell you exactly when it was. About oh gosh, it was already 5 weeks ago on my show Trust and Estates Weekly. I had my friend Cedric Collins on, and he wrote a book called Prudent Planning for Family Legacy. So Cedric is an estate planning lawyer, and he is very passionate about helping people get their estate planning in order to avoid a lot of the headaches that are associated with having, well, with frankly with dying or with having a relative who passes away. And so Cedric wrote and published this book, and now when he talks to potential clients, he can say, hey, I wrote this book, and there it is. It's quite a nice book. The other reason in that whole sort of establishing authority and credibility is it also builds trust. So frankly, even though sometimes books that are written are frankly a bunch of nonsense, the fact that someone has written a book makes it seem like they're more trustworthy, especially if that book has been published as opposed to self-published. So we kind of take it for granted that if a third party publishes somebody's book, they are vouching for that person in terms of the truthfulness of the book or the value of the book. And so that's another aspect of establishing credibility, is the book stands as sort of a third party lending their credence to you as a professional or someone in business. So another reason for writing a book is to build your personal and brand image. And I think that's another reason why Cedric wrote his book. Is his law firm is known as One Legacy, right? And in order to build that brand, right, he built a book that was, in terms of its image, branded, I think, fairly similarly to his law firm. And so that spreads that image more widely, right? And now if you go to Amazon, for example, and look for books on estate planning, you see his book. And then if you're looking for an estate planning attorney and you see his website, you're going to go, oh wait, I've seen this before. Oh, and just the awareness that you've seen it before lends that it's like, that's what branding is, right? It lends the sort of credibility. Oh, this is out there, right? It's the, whatever you want to call it, the Coca-Cola effect, right? So in fact, we can see the Coca-Cola logo without Coca-Cola in it, and we still go, oh yeah, Coca-Cola, right? Because it's so common. So we can do the same thing with a book. So the book increases our exposure. It also creates media opportunities. So when I found out that Cedric had written his book, I asked him to come on my show to talk about it, right? And in so doing, he got an opportunity to talk about not only the book, but present himself as a professional. And so again, that builds his brand through that media appearance. I also referred him to another friend of mine who has an even more watched show than I do. And again, he was exposed to all those people building his brand. Related to that, but not exactly the same, is marketing and business development. So a lot of people will write a book and they use it specifically for business development. So they're not necessarily interested in selling the book per se through Amazon, although it may be available there. Really, what they do is they give it to people who are prospective clients or customers. So I don't know if this is what I'm using Cedric as an example, just because it's recent. He's a friend, so give him a little free publicity here. I don't know if Cedric is giving his book away to people for free, but he certainly could do that. Or if he's working to get someone as his client, he could send him that book and they would look through that, and not only does that build his credibility, but it becomes then a marketing tool. Oh, well, this fellow who wrote this book, he's obviously very dedicated to helping people out, and this is the kind of person I want handling my estate planning from the legal side. So there you go. And you can also if you're going to conventions, conferences, different types of like bar association meetings, right? If you have a stack of books on the table, or if you're at a speaking engagement and in the rear of house, you have a stack of books that are available either for people to take or even to buy. So then that becomes a marketing and business development opportunity. Again, now next reason, again, related to that is networking and relationships. So marketing these days, a lot of marketing is done through networking. Networking is a type of marketing. And so when you write a book, it gives you the opportunity to build connections. Okay. So in the same way that I use my shows, this should be no surprise, to build connections. So in Cedric's case, we became friends last year. We've connected a few times, but having him come on my show deepens that connection. So as a relationship building tool, a book can as well, and it can do it in a number of ways. One is, excuse me, the not unlike the marketing, you can offer the book to people. Next is you can consult with people while you're writing the book in order to get their expertise and perhaps highlight that in the book. Okay, so I haven't read all of Cedric's book, but if there was an accountant who specialized in estate planning and administration that he was building a relationship with, one of the things he might have done is spoken to that accountant and maybe gotten kind of like a quote or even just a paragraph or something about one of the accounting challenges, and then included that in the book. And in so doing, he's building that relationship because he's giving someone exposure without them having to do anything other than perhaps speak with him for 30 minutes or an hour, right? And so that builds that relationship. Okay. And then you can also collaborate. So write a book with someone else. And again, that really builds a relationship. Now, collaborating can be a challenge, of course, especially writing, but there are collaborations can be a great way to get to know someone better and to share expertise. So, for example, a lawyer and an accountant might get together and write a book on estate planning from both of those perspectives, and in so doing make the book even more valuable because it's dealing with both the legal as well as the financial aspects of putting together an estate plan. Next is personal development. So one of the things that writing a book will do, and this was certainly the case when I wrote my book, is it helps us take this body of knowledge that we have and codify it into a more organized way of understanding it. And then it will also show us where there may be gaps in our knowledge. So I know in writing my book, and I'm going to show you the book later, so I'm going to sort of, tantalize you with that a little bit. Wow. Ooh. But in any event, what I found was as I was writing my book, there were certain aspects of the subject that I realized I didn't know enough about. So that motivated me to go and research those topics, talk to other people so that I could fill in my knowledge enough to be able to write about them credibly. And so that's another aspect of writing a book is it's a personal development tool. And by the way, just exercising the discipline of writing a book is a personal development function. Even a short book takes a lot of self-discipline in order to get it done. It's so easy to be distracted. So I know I used to talk to my daughter about this because she's an excellent writer, and she likes to write stories and comics and all these things. And one of her challenges was she would start writing something and then get bored with it and set it aside. And yet, in the back of her mind, she wanted to finish it. And so we would, Daddy, how do I finish it? And I said, well, in the end, what most successful writers do is they set aside time each day to write. Okay. Or now, if they can't write every day, if that's not their profession, then maybe they set time aside 3 days a week or something like that. And during that time, they shut out everything else and they just write. And even if at the end of the set time period, they have nothing of value, nonetheless, they've exercised the discipline to write. And when I will say, when I wrote my book, each 4 mornings a week from, I believe it was 8 until 11, I blocked out those 3 hours to write. And sometimes I was very productive, and sometimes I get to the end and be like, okay, well, didn't get anything here I can use. And that's just the way it was. And I kept doing that until I got the book written. And it was both grueling in a way, but it was also quite fun in a way, because it really was a challenge, and it gave me a sense of personal growth, that I was able to stick to this plan. And then, just as an aside, after I got done writing the book, I kept that same thing, because then, in the process that I learned from Michael Hyatt of sending out of writing a book proposal and sending out queries and all that kind of stuff, it's the same kind of thing. It's pretty much a discipline play, because it's an iterative process. So you just have to keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And and so again, blocking out time. I didn't do that for 3 hours a day. I think I blocked out an hour and a half a day for doing that. But just for that time, that was the time for doing that. And again, it was a great exercise in personal development. So next is to sort of build a legacy, to have an impact. And I think at the heart of my desire to be an author, at least part of it is that a book, it outlasts us, or it can outlast us. So if you consider something like Livy's History of Rome, which was written now, I think 2,500 years ago or something like that. So, Livy, the author, is long since dead, right? But his book still is read. I mean, I have it in my library. I've read it. Okay. Or William Shakespeare, right? His work is 500 years old or something like that. So a book can outlast us. Now, obviously, most books are not going to become Shakespeare or Livy or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, it does give us an opportunity to leave a legacy behind, and that can be important. And now, if the book is targeted, for example, to your specific field, and it really helps people in your field develop, so then, even though it's not going to be a Livy, or you're not going to be a Livy or a Shakespeare, nonetheless, your book may live on for generations, because it's so useful a tool, right? So Black's legal dictionary, law dictionary, Black is a person, I'm pretty sure, right? And his law dictionary has been around for over 100 years, I think. So this is a book that's used by law students and lawyers today, because the definitions of legal terms don't really change that much. And so it becomes it's become something that's important to the legal profession. Okay. So those 6, I think, are, if you will, the best reasons. I have a couple of others, and I'm separating these two because the reality of the book business today is they're far, far, far less likely to happen than they would have been, you know, 40 years ago or even 30 years ago. So one of them is financial benefits. So in theory, if you write a book, you might have something that you can sell that would create an additional revenue stream. Now, in the days when large publishers controlled most of the book publishing business, if you were able to get a publishing deal, you probably were going to, if the book had, if you hadn't written the book yet, oftentimes you would get what's called an advance, which means an advance on royalties. And so in essence, you're getting paid to write the book. If you've already written the book, you'd be able to sell the book, uh, retaining the copyright usually, and you would still get an advance against royalties, and it would depend. Now, if you're an extremely well-known person, these days you can still get, in some cases, even a seven-figure advance. So very well-known politicians, former presidents, it's not at all unusual for them to get a seven-figure advance on a book that they would write, even taking into account that the book may be, ghost written, frankly. Okay. But the reason that publishers will give these huge advances these days is the person is very well known. And when the book comes out, there's a certain level of guaranteed sales. So they're going to be able to recoup that advance. For you and me, it's much harder to get an advance, and in fact it's pretty unusual these days. Most books do not get advances these days. They just don't, unless you're already somewhat established. And I'm not going to get into the details of this, but if you are if you have a social media presence that's large enough, then maybe you can get an advance. But these days, a typical advance is not very large. So I remember, this is even going back years ago, back 30 years ago, I met a young woman. She was just starting her academic career, and she was writing a book about, I think it was one of the founding fathers or something. Anyway, she had gotten, I believe it was a $25,000 advance. Now, $25,000 was a lot more money 30 years ago than it is today, but it's not a huge amount of money. It certainly would not have qualified for, even a year's income, not even really, I mean, maybe 6 months income. Nonetheless, this was a huge advance for an academic for the type of book that she wrote. And she had quite a bit of, uh, I want to say industry fame. That doesn't sound right, but in academic circles, she was known for having gotten this very large advance, right? So, but think about it. If it's going to take you, 1,000 hours to write a book, and that's entirely possible when all is said and done. And you get even if you get a $25,000 advance, that's $25 an hour, right? So that's not horrible. But the reality is today, that would be today, 30 years later, a $25,000 advance would be a pretty good advance, right? So, $5,000 advance would be nice for a lot of books. So there, you're making not even, minimum wage. So writing a book for the financial benefits, you're probably not, in the end you may have a small financial benefit, but it's unlikely that what you make from selling the book is going to even come close to reimbursing you for the time that it took. Okay, now you might write something and it becomes a big hit, and and all of that, and that does happen. Okay, but I would caution against expecting that to happen, because It is unlikely, especially given the millions of books that are published these days. So the other uh, why for writing a book is to have a piece of intellectual property. So when you write a book, assuming that you're writing it of your own volition and it's not a work for hire, so now you own the copyright to the book. And that can be a nice thing. The fact of the matter is, though, a copyright is only valuable to the extent that people will pay you for basically a license for that copyright. So again, owning a copyright is nice. Having intellectual property is nice, but in the end, it isn't anything other than owning the intellectual property. So I own this coaster. It was made by the Allegiance Flag Company, I think is what it was called. It's got their logo on it, right? And I think I paid whatever $4 for it, and it's nice. I own it, okay, but whatever doesn't really mean anything. And by the way, so just talking about intellectual property for a minute, this is their logo. It may be a little bit hard to see here. I'll show it and let you see. It's basically a triangle with stars in it, right? So this is one way that they were Alliance Flag Company, I think actually it is. This is one way they were able to make money off of their intellectual property. This is their logo, and they got this nice leather, and they made these coasters, right? And they sell them for a few dollars each. Okay, so you might be able to do something like that with your intellectual property, but unless you're going to make it your full-time endeavor, the reality is making money off of your intellectual property typically is going to be at most a secondary rationale for writing a book rather than a primary one. All right, so assuming you have made the decision you are going to write a book and you've got your why. Okay, so what should you write about? So I'm going to give you several ideas here. This isn't necessarily a complete list that I put together, but I think some of these ideas may resonate with you. So one idea is to write about your industry or professional expertise. So that's, for example, what Cedric did with his book on estate planning, right? He's been an estate planning lawyer for, I believe it's 10 or 12 years. And he wrote a book about it because he knows so much about it and wanted to be able to share that knowledge with a larger audience. Okay. And it gave him the opportunity to really dig into his expertise and order it, okay, which is one of the reasons for writing a book. Okay. And now you can write about just how to do something, but you can also write about, for example, an emerging trend in your industry. Okay, so let's say that you are very involved with AI, right? That's the big thing in technology these days. So perhaps you're in a position to write a book about emerging trends in AI. That would be probably of interest to a lot of people because a lot of people are interested in AI, even people beyond the tech business, right? So a lot of people in a wide variety of businesses are trying to figure out, well, how is AI going to impact my industry? And so if you write a book about emerging trends, then people in, I don't know, automobile sales, in estate planning, in estate administration, right? We might buy that book in order to get ideas about how we might apply AI to our businesses or professions. Okay. Another subject that you might write about is your personal journey. So your career progression, or what I call your career arc. Oftentimes guests on this show, that's what we're talking about, is their career arc. And that's one of the reasons why I have guests on this show, is so that you can learn from their experience. So by the same token, writing about our career experiences also gives people the opportunity to do that. And it's something presumably we know well since we lived it, right? Now, along the way, in talking about a career journey, we can develop lessons learned that people can apply to their lives, right? That's really the essence of having a guest on People Making Money, is for people, is to distill lessons learned that we can apply to our lives. So you can do that in a book as well. Another popular subject for a book, especially from people in business or professions, is leadership and management. Now, you see this in particular among military people who either are out of the military or retired, and they go into the civilian business world, and they take the leadership skills that they developed in the military, and then they use those in the civilian world as consultants, as coaches, as trainers. My friend Mark Brooker has written, I think, 2 books now on leadership. He's a retired captain from the United States Navy. His last job in the Navy was he ran a medical center. So he's basically the chief, administrator of a hospital. And I mean, throughout his career, he exercised leadership. But when you're running a hospital with hundreds or even thousands of employees there, so leadership and management is the skill that you need. And Mark was very successful in that particular billet. He I think they were named the #1 hospital in Navy Medicine West, or maybe even in Navy medicine nationwide. And so, and that's not, Mark would tell you, he would say, it wasn't due to my leadership. It was due to all the people who worked so hard to make that happen. That's frankly his humility coming through, which is a good thing for a leader to be, is humble. Because in part, I think the reason people excelled at their work, not the only reason, but part of the reason was because Mark is such a fine leader and he has a very deep passion for it. He will go to, we met because at the time I was chaplain at a SEAL team, and Mark was interested in talking to some of the SEALs about leadership issues. And so I invited him to my unit and, gave him the chance to, I introduced him to people and gave him a chance to talk to them, make some contacts and all of that. So leadership and management is a popular topic for people in business, especially, to write about. Another is business strategies and tactics. So if you've seen my Tuesday show, Business Lessons from the Military, this is essentially, it's not a book, of course, it's a show, but it's about business strategy and tactics. And the idea of the show is I look at at military doctrine, at military history, at the practices of great military leaders, and then I translate that into the civilian business realm. Okay, so each week I spend 30 to 40 minutes essentially speaking a short book. Maybe it's like an audio book, if you will, on business strategies and tactics. And what I find, and this is what I found as a teacher in general, is if I can use an example that's vivid, people will remember the underlying ideas much better. So, when I was teaching, I would stand on the table and make up these elaborate stories and all this kind of stuff. When we write, the same thing is the case. So writing about business strategy and tactics, we can take examples from our career and show how they either worked out well or completely bombed, right? And then draw lessons from them. Okay, not unrelated to that is innovation and entrepreneurship. So, whereas strategy and tactics might be a broader category. Innovation and entrepreneurship is a pretty broad category, but innovation, which is really the driver of entrepreneurship, can also be a subject to write about, especially if you've been a successful entrepreneur. Now, this word entrepreneurship has been somewhat watered down over the previous decades to mean starting a business. Entrepreneurship used to mean starting an innovative business, right? So nothing wrong with starting a plumbing business, but in general, plumbing is what plumbing is. It's a fine business, but it's not really entrepreneurship for most plumbers because they're not doing anything particularly innovative. However, I had to have the drain line in front of my house basically. Well, I didn't have to replace it. This was the innovative thing. So the plumber who came out to fix the problem, which was a drain line that had collapsed, had this innovative method where basically they opened up the drain line at one end and at the other end, and instead of having to untrench the whole line and lay a new line, they put this thing through it that basically created a it was like putting another pipe inside the original pipe, except for this would prevent the original pipe from ever collapsing again. And it was quite a fascinating process. The plumbers who were doing it explained it to me because, like I said, it was very innovative. Now, maybe if you're in plumbing, you would say, "I don't know, we've been doing that for a long, long time." Okay, fair enough. I mean, I'd never seen it done before. But my point is that there are innovations going on even in the businesses that have been around for a long, long time. And so to the extent that you're doing something innovative, entrepreneurial in your business or profession, that can make a great topic for a book. Okay, next is personal development and productivity. So because running a business is a personal development endeavor, okay, that always is a good subject for a book. Okay, so one of the whys, as you recall, for writing a book is because it helps us with personal development. Okay, so the process of writing the book is a personal developmental function. The subject too, though, can be personal development. So I know for myself, being in business, especially the first time I was in business, and when I had my first company, building that company and getting to the point where it was successful required me to learn a tremendous amount. It required me to examine some of my ideas and values. So some of you have heard me talk about this before. I was brought up to believe that people became rich through nefarious means, either through cheating people or stealing or something like that. And I was in a business where I needed to get business from wealthy people, and it works at cross purposes to think that wealthy people are a bunch of liars and cheaters, but yet I want your business. And I think in the early days of my business, they could sense somehow that I didn't have a particularly high opinion of them. And at some point, I had to re-examine that, especially in light of the evidence that many of the wealthy people that I met were very charitable. They were good people. They loved their children, took care of them very well. They had a lot of friends, sincere friends, all that kind of stuff. So while it's certainly true that some people become wealthy through cheating and lying or whatever, my experience as I was building my business led me to change my ideas about how wealth happens or how people become wealthy. And that was a personal developmental function for me or endeavor for me, for it really being almost forced to examine my thinking and how my thinking was, first of all, untrue, and second, impeding my own success. So, to the extent that you have that experience in your business or your professional life, that can be a great subject for a book. Now, sort of a maybe even a subset of several of the categories that I've or several of the topics I should say that I've mentioned is doing a case study or documenting some kind of success story. So, for example, there have been books written on, this is one of my favorite examples. I use this periodically, the whole new Coke debacle, right? When Coca-Cola thought they would change their formula, make it more similar to Pepsi, and that would allow them to, finally completely defeat their arch enemy Pepsi, right? And it was a disaster. There's just no other way of describing it, right? And so subsequent to the working out of that and the bringing out of Classic Coke and all that, there were books written about it, and they were essentially case studies in what do you do if you make a strategic move that doesn't work. How do you recover, right? That's a great topic for a book, and it happens with a lot of businesses. So if you've had something like that happen where oftentimes, by the way, case studies where you just were successful from day one, those are fine, but oftentimes the most effective case studies are how you recovered from something that went wrong, because most of us, we know things are going to go wrong, and recovering from them is a more common need. The fact that we build a plan and it goes off fine from the get-go, that's nice. It's, I mean, I wish all that happens to all of you, right? But that's not usually how things happen in life. Usually we have ups and downs, and oftentimes, especially if we're starting some sort of new endeavor, we're not going to be successful right away. We've got to sort of wallow around in the muck, so to speak, until we figure it out. And so, writing a case study, especially about recovering from a debacle and going on to making that initiative successful, can be a great idea. Okay, I'm going to just quickly go through a few other topics I have here on my list, just because I want to get to the hows of writing a book, talk about that a little bit. But some other ideas are how to network and build relationships, how to market your business, how to deal with technology, especially how to deal with some kind of technological or digital transformation. Okay, you might talk about financial management in a business, or just financial management for people personally, right? This is what's the fellow's name? Doug, can't think of his last name, right? He built his entire business by writing books about how people can handle their personal finances, right? Crisis management is another thing. Work-life balance, another idea. And then a couple of other ones are industry predictions and future insights, i.e., where is my industry likely to go? Right now, I mentioned this earlier about AI. AI is probably going to impact pretty much every industry, every type of business, every type of profession. The question is how, right? So when I talk to lawyers, which I do fairly often, one of the topics I'd like to talk to them about is AI, because the reality is a lot of law is drawing up documents, and while it may have in the past have been every document was different, these days there's a lot of standardization in legal documents. And so to the extent that legal documents are fairly similar, AI it can be used to draft them much more quickly and effectively than drafting them from scratch. And indeed, I was talking to somebody yesterday, and we were talking about how lawyers today in general prefer to deal with some kind of form document. Oftentimes, I should say, prefer to deal with some kind of form document rather than creating something completely from scratch. Because if it's a form document, it's been looked over and reviewed and revised multiple times usually. And so the likelihood that something will be left out is significantly lower than drafting a document from scratch. So, but if it's the case, for example, that AI is going to de-emphasize document preparation in the law business, how is that going to change the law business, right? So if you're a paralegal and a lot of what you do is document drafting, how is AI going to affect your profession? On the other hand, if you're a lawyer and you don't really enjoy drafting documents, but you like being in front of clients, okay, like my friend Ben Inman, who's an estate planning attorney in Virginia. So Ben has used technology in his practice in a way where he really, I put this in quotes, makes his money talking with his clients, meeting with his clients, learning as much as he can about their needs, right? So that when it comes time to drafting the documents, which by his own acknowledgement are, there's a lot of similarity between trusts that he writes for two different clients, but by being able to really focus his time on talking and meeting and talking with his clients, he can make the alterations that need to be made to tailor that document for them much more effectively than if he would have to spend a tremendous time drafting the document, because the money that he charges is spent mostly interacting with the client, and so he can give a much higher level of service. So it's very interesting to see how Ben has built his business, right? So that's another thing: industry predictions and future insights. And then finally, just specialized topics. So I'm going to mention my friend Ben again. He was a guest on this show a few weeks ago. In addition to being an estate planning attorney, he's also a firearms attorney, which is a really kind of niche area in the law. And I think hopefully one day Ben is going to write a book about this. It's such a specialized topic. Now, most people are not going to be interested in the topic, but for people who are firearms enthusiasts or for people who are interested in firearms policy, right? Ben has a long history. I invite you to, go to, shameless plug, right? Go to our YouTube channel and check out Ben's the episode where I talked to Ben about being a firearms attorney. For people who are policymakers who are in that realm of the law, Ben, he's been in many different aspects of dealing with firearms law, and so he has a very informed opinion about these in this very specialized topic. So that would make, I think it would make a terrific book. In fact, next time I speak to Ben, I'm going to mention that to him. So those are some ideas on what to write your book about. So then it comes down to, how are you going to write your book? So I'm going to offer a couple of ways or that you can do it. Now, I mentioned earlier the way most professional writers work is they allocate a certain amount of time each day for writing. So if you read Stephen King's book on writing, okay, it's a brilliant book on how to be an effective writer. Okay, when I was writing my book, that was one of the books I read for inspiration. And there are many books about writing that can be very helpful. Stephen King's book is helpful because one of the things he talks about is this blocking out of time for writing and how to make that process most effective. Okay, I think it's King who talks about he plays a certain type of music that helps keep him focused, and he sets up his environment the right way, and then he just gets down to it and writes. Now, that's a viable way to do it. Okay. However, I would say that for the lay writer like me, probably like you, that's a difficult way to go if you haven't built up your writing muscle. So how can we build up our writing muscle? One of the ways to do it, and this is the way I did it, was I was a blogger for many years before I wrote my book. In fact, I started blogging in 2012, I believe it was 2011 or 2012. And I didn't write my book until I think I wrote my book 2016, 2017 was when I wrote my book. So I had been blogging for 4 or 5 years, maybe, 4 or 5 years before I wrote my book. And while I started out doing only one blog post a week, one short blog post a week, at the height, I was writing 3 blog posts a week, okay, of whatever they were, 400 or 600 words each or whatever. I don't remember anymore. If you go to my website, you can read my blog posts. Now, what I did then when I decided to, and one of the subjects on which I blogged was what became the topic of my book. So over the years that I blogged, I blogged on a number of different topics, and one of them ended up being, I started doing some coaching around this as well. I know I'm keeping you in suspense, right? But when you blog on a subject, it gives you an opportunity to investigate a lot of different aspects of a subject, okay? And the thing about blogging, and I learned this from Michael Hyatt, he very, very famous blogger at the time that I started getting into it, and he was one of the pioneers of it, really, is that I just lost my thought. That you do it on a regular basis. So that's why I started out doing one blog post a week. Okay, so again, it's not just about doing the writing; it's about building your writing muscle. So writing one blog post every week will build more muscle than writing 4 blog posts one week and writing none the next 2 weeks and then maybe 2 the week after. It's getting into the habit of doing it. That's what will help you develop your writer's muscle and go on to be able to write something longer form. Okay. And by the way, this is where most people fall down when they're blogging, is they'll blog for a while and then they stop doing it for a long time. And I can tell you, as a former blogger, it's very, very difficult to do it week after week. And when I was doing 3 blog posts a week, wow, it was a lot of writing. It was a lot of coming up with ideas and writing titles and posting them on my website and all that kind of stuff. So you really learn, and promoting them, by the way. So you really learn how to be disciplined. Now, so that's one way of not only working on developing writer's muscle, but also gathering material that you can then use to compile into a book. And that's part of my book is blog posts that I had written over the years. And I went through my blog and said, oh, I can use this piece and this piece and this piece and this piece. And I organized them and reorganized them. And it was sort of like building a puzzle, getting them into an order that made sense. And then, as I mentioned earlier, figuring out, oh, where were parts of my topic missing? In which case, because I was still blogging at the time I was writing my book, I would maybe write a blog post on that topic, or I would just do additional research for the book in order to fill that in. So that's a very effective way of writing a book. Now, you can say, well, I don't want to wait 5 years to write a book. Well, okay, you don't have to wait 5 years. You can start out from the get-go writing your blog with the intention of compiling all those posts and turning them into a book, right? So if you write even one blog post a week, after a year, you're going to have about 50 posts. Okay. And depending on how long they are, that may be enough material for your book, depending on what your topic is and why you're writing and all that kind of stuff, right? Not every book needs to be 300, 400, 500 pages. Sometimes you can write a very effective book that's 80 pages, 110 pages, something relatively short. So it really just depends on your why and your what. Okay. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, and this was suggested to me by a friend of mine named Anita Jacobs. So Anita Jacobs was I don't know, I think she's retired now, but she was a speaker. She did a lot of training for fundraisers, and she spoke excuse me, in support of various organizations, excuse me, for them to do fundraising. And I was talking to Anita one day. She's one of my mentors, and I was talking to her about writing a book, and I was saying, but I just don't have time. And she said, aren't you teaching real estate classes? I said, yes, I am. She said, well, then you've got the easiest way to write a book ever. I'm like, really? How? And she said, well, just record one of your classes and then have someone transcribe the recording, and now you've basically got a draft of a book. You'll have to revise it and organize it and all of that, but you'll have at least the beginning of a book, right? And I actually started working on that, and then I got way late or whatever. But in these days, because with technology, there's technology that can transcribe something that we've spoken, right? So it would be even easier to do that today. So, for example, I don't do a blog anymore. I do what could be called a video blog, right? Podcasting is essentially an outgrowth of blogging, right? And there's audio podcasting, there's video podcasting like this, right? That's the format I use. So if I wanted to write a book, for example, called Business Lessons from the Military, and I honestly, I didn't even think about doing that until just now. One of the things I could do is transcribe all my shows for the last 2 seasons. I could probably find some online transcription, app to write all that down, and then I could organize it into categories: management, strategy, tactics, marketing, or whatever it might be, right? And I could turn that into a book, and you could do the same thing. So whether you're actively podcasting, or whether you're teaching something, whether you're giving talks, you can record them and then transcribe those recordings and use that as the basic material for a book. By the way, if you find it hard to write but you speak, you can also these days just dictate a book, right? Like if you've seen in movies, right? Miss Jones, come in with your pad. I'm gonna, for dictation, right? Right. And then the days when that's what secretaries did, right? And they'd write it down in shorthand and then they'd type it up, right? So we can do that today on our computers. We can do it on our phones, I imagine. So that's another way of writing a book that may make it simpler. Now, if you are not already either podcasting or speaking regularly or teaching regularly or blogging regularly, so if you are going to, for example, dictate your book to an app, that is essentially the same thing as I was talking about at the beginning of this section, i.e., blocking out time each day to write your book. In this case, you're not typing it or writing it longhand, you're speaking it, but it is the same discipline. And so I would encourage you to think about that. In fact, I'll put a link to Stephen King's book on writing in the show notes. If you're going to go that sort of professional writer's direction. I can't encourage you enough to read Stephen King's book, because it really will give you a very good sense about what you're going to need to be doing in order to make that technique actually work. But these days, you don't have to be typing things out. You can be dictating them. And in fact, you can probably be dictating them, and it can probably come up on a screen, as you dictate it, or, on your phone as you dictate it. So that technology is probably out there. So those are some ways of, how can I write a book, right? Now, you might say, well, shouldn't I write an outline first? Well, I mean, you can go that route, okay? But sometimes it's better to get your expertise sort of out of yourself onto paper, and then look at what all of that is, and then organize it into a coherent book, okay? Because while we talked about all of those what's, like what should you write about, you may have the intention to write about, let's say, emerging trends, okay? And then you get your whole outline doing that, and then as you start to write the book, or even if you're writing blog posts that you're going to compile into a book, what you may find is that you're really struggling to find your voice on that topic. Whereas if you write about something within your business or profession that interests you, and you just write about it, this is why I like the idea of blogging so much. So then you're writing something that you're really engaged in, and then you can take all of that engaged writing and see, well, does it work best as a case study? Does it work best as a tome on leadership or management? Does it work best as a story of a personal journey, right? You can look at some of these options and see, well, how is what I've written, how can I best present that so it will be of the greatest benefit to the readers? So I'm sure there are people who absolutely disagree with me. No, you have to know what you're writing from the beginning. I don't agree with that topic. I'm with that idea, I should say. I think that the key thing in writing is to write, and this is what I used to tell my daughter all the time: is if you want to be a writer, you need to write, okay? And pick a topic and write about it, and write about it as much and as often as you can. But indeed on a regular basis, okay? Once a week, twice a week, whatever you're doing. So I'm going to end the show by showing you my book. Some of you have seen this before. My book is called The 8 Deadly Sins of Job Hunting. Avoid employment hell, taking the only 5 steps necessary to getting a high-paying job. So at the time that I wrote this book, I had been blogging about job hunting for veterans for several years, I think 2 or 3 years. And I had run a program coaching veterans on how to find a high-paying job. And so I took that experience and those blog posts, and I turned them into what became this book. Okay. And, right, the very dramatic cover there that I designed, right? Hell, the fires of hell, and all of that. And of course, it's a play on words, because there's not 8 deadly sins, there's 7 deadly sins. My joke is, military people, we like to really do things with, a lot of gusto. So, and the title came out of a study that I did of why veterans were not getting the kind of civilian job that they wanted. And what I found after doing a series of over 100 interviews, some lasting only 10 or 15 minutes, some lasting over an hour. And as an aside, I'll acknowledge this was not scientific in the sense of something like the Pew Research Center might do. But it was a lot of time spent, and in most cases, pretty in-depth conversations. I found that the things that were keeping veterans from getting the job they wanted boiled down to 8 sins, I called them. There were 8 reasons why most veterans were not finding the job they wanted, and that became the basis for the book. And so that's all good and well. Okay, it's all good and well to tell veterans, well, here's why you're not finding a job, but then what are you going to do about that? I mean, it would be completely negative to write a book about why my life isn't working, right? So that's why I created these 5 steps for getting a high-paying job. And so, excuse me, let me go to the shoot. Oh, okay, here it goes. Yeah, Google Books. Oh, wait, what is going on here? Oh, is this taking me through documents? Yeah. Okay, I wanted to, let's see if I can, 4, does that work? Nope. Okay, the Google Docs doesn't want to, this is part of my love-hate relationship with Google Docs. That's why I don't like it. But I was gonna try and take you to the open in Google Docs, maybe. Let's see. I was going to take you to the table of contents so you could see eventually how I organize the book, and and Google is just spinning and spinning and spinning. But what you would see if I could show you the table of contents is I described a deadly sin or 2 deadly sins. I think in one case, I think there's most it's 2. And then I show the step you take to overcome that deadly sin, right? And the book is, it really was, I took the blog posts, reformatted them as chapters to the book. And then after each chapter is a task, so that it was really not just a step by step, but a task by task system for finding the job that veterans wanted, right? And that became the basis for the book. And for me, who's, as you know, if you've watched the show, very highly organized, OCD type guy, that seemed to me to be the best way to organize things. But I didn't come to that organizational scheme right away. And in fact, it was through talking with other people, through the coaching work I did with veterans, et cetera, that I came up with this, 5 steps to get a high paying job, and then married these 2 ideas together in a way that made sense in the book. So, like I said, I had an agent. She wasn't able to get me a book deal, I should say. And now I still coach veterans pro bono through something called Veterati, and I offer them a free PDF of the book if they want it, and that's what I use it for these days. Maybe someday I'll try and hunt up a publisher again. Who knows? But I have ideas for other books. So my desire to become a published author will happen some other way. So that's the story of writing a book. And I thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, comments, criticisms, thoughts, please do post them in our social media. The links will be in the show notes after the show posts on YouTube. And if you have anything of a private nature, my email address will be there too. You can always send me an email. Happy to answer those. And that wraps us up for this week. So before signing off, just want to remind you, next week, Monday at 10 a.m., all these are Pacific times, my show, Trusts and Estates Weekly. On Tuesday at 10 a.m., Business Lessons from the Military. 7 days from today, we'll be back for the next edition of People Making Money. And then next week on Thursday at 5 p.m. is our newest show, Jiggers' Place. It's an opportunity for us as we head to the end of the week to just spend some time together talking about everything except business and professional matters. So we have a cocktail and talk about a topic together. So I invite you to come and relax for 30 or 40 minutes at Jiggers' Place on Thursday afternoon, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So thanks again for joining me. Appreciate it very, very much. Looking forward to seeing you next week and signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.